Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing. Today, we are discussing a legend, 39 millimeters in platinum. This is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar Skeleton, reference 25829PT. This watch is an extraordinary assembly of artistry at every level. Handcrafted of platinum on the outside, hand skeletonized, engraved, and finished on the inside. It's the best of all possible worlds. 39 millimeters in diameter, it is 9.4 millimeters thick. The case itself, if we're just measuring the case, the distance across the wrist is 49.3 millimeters, and then these little intermediate end links, the total distance across the wrist is 52.5 millimeters. So while the watch is a 39, you always need to consider a full bracelet, Royal Oak or offshore, as wearing a few sizes larger. So think of this as maybe a 41 millimeter round watch, and you get a good sense of how it wears. So I recommend it for a wrist as small as 14, 15 centimeters in circumference. If your wrist is flat across the top, 14. If your wrist is oddly round, then 15. So that's the size. 14 if your wrist is like mine, flat across the top and oval. Again, you're looking at a 16 centimeter circumference wrist down the barrel, now over the top, and finally the cuff shot, and you can see it easily slides underneath the dress cuff. Now the bracelet's in great shape, so's the case. The tolerances here are important because sometimes when these things age or they're refinished unprofessionally, they can develop play. This one, as you could see, has no more than the type of play you would expect having come from the factory at delivery, at inception. So it's in very good shape. You can also see that the finishing is minute and intricate, with even little surfaces like the interior faces of these intermediate links having been polished. It's almost impossible to see those polished facets unless you really roll the bracelet. You can also see that there's a perfectly aligned bevel that runs across the shoulders of the links, that they're vertically satinated outboard and longitudinally satinated across the top. Now, the integration of the case, the lugs, and the bracelet was the idea coined by the designer of the original Royal Oak, Gerald Genta, back in 1972. He considered himself first and foremost a jewelry designer, so his ideal for a watch was basically a bracelet that happened to have a timepiece attached, and that was what he achieved here. The watch, of course, is incredibly difficult to achieve, with the bracelet by itself requiring somewhere between 9 and 12 hours to finish, and when it's something like platinum, it's definitely on the high end of that scale. Now, removable links, here you can see them in place. They are fixed in place using screws, so you can size this with a jeweler's screwdriver. We have an AP single fold logo style clasp, so we have the AP logo internally, and then we have a sliding trigger release system that you pull back in order to latch it closed. And the watch features robust and well-defined angles and facets, which is always important on a Royal Oak. Now, I'm not saying it's never been polished. I'm saying it has been scarcely and professionally refinished in its lifetime. Now, you can see on the reverse of this watch, make sure you can see that, it is mid-E series. Now, AP serial numbers are a little bit confusing. There used to be consensus on the kind of eras described by the alphanumerics, but according to Audemars Piguet itself, the E's on certain watches could have appeared anytime between 1998 and 2010, and I believe that this right here is an early 2000s example of the 25829PT. The watch, of course, also features a bezel that is beautifully defined and sharply so. If you look carefully, you could see that the white gold bolts in this bezel do not protrude proud of the bezel. And that's important, as oftentimes Audemars Piguet describes the threshold for bezel replacement at the point at which the bolts are proud of the bezel as opposed to recessed. And you can see right here the satin, the polish, and then the top satin. All that's really well defined and separated, doesn't blur together, and the actual bolts themselves are recessed. Now, you might also wonder what these bolts are made of, because they're not the same color as the platinum. Well, traditionally on a Royal Oak, they would be white gold. The thing is, non-rhodium plated white gold looks really warm, even yellow, next to platinum, which is truly white. That's why they appear almost like yellow gold, but they are white gold, and they are bolts, by the way. There are nuts inside the case. That's how they can be aligned perfectly all the way around. You'll also note that these examples featured AP branded hexagonal crowns that match the hexagonal shape of the bolts. This is a monoblock case, something that would later go away on the AP jumbos, and this is the jumbo case as originally envisioned. So the case back, although it does have a sapphire display, case back and the mid case are one piece of metal hewn from the solid, and then you have this a duplicate finish with satin on the side and then polish on the back and then circular satin on the back. So this is very important. This is the old school and expensive way of making the jumbo case. You can also see the notch on top of the crown. The crown, the dial, and the movement, everything lowers in from the front. It's a front loader. The dial features two sapphires, one over the dial, simple. The next is a bit more complex. It serves as a platform on which the actual scales for the calendar, as well as the minute and hour displays, they're actually printed on that lower sapphire. We have displays for the day, the date, we have the month and the leap year phase, and then we have the moon phase. And as you can see, it is a crescent-style moon phase. The perpetual calendar doesn't need to be adjusted until the year 2100. Leap years, irregular length months, it can deal with all of that. From the time you set the moon phase to the time you need to correct it will be 122 years every time. We have blackened gold leaf-style hands for the hours and minutes, and then blued broadsword hands for the sub-register. You can see that the 2800 module, that's what the calendar complication is called by AP, it has been entirely skeletonized and finished. In fact, everything you see on this side really is finished steel, as it is silvery with satin across the top. You can see how even the springs and the jumpers and the stars for the individual displays, they've been hand finished. You could see the keyless works visible underneath the date display, the motion works at center that drive the hands, and then the individual drive modules and jumper springs for the calendar displays. Look at the springs themselves, satinated on their tops and beveled on their side. The quality of the anglage on parts this small is second to none. It's very difficult to bevel steel. Harder still to do it when the parts are as tiny as wire-style springs. Now we will pop this clasp open one more time and take a look at the back. The module is called the 2800. The base movement is the 2120. A long time ago, 1967, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron commissioned this automatic ultra-thin movement from JLC. It was called the JLC 920, and while the Holy Trinity all used the movement, neither JLC nor any of JLC's other customers ever did use the movement. So it features a beryllium ring that runs all the way around, and then there's a mass on one side. So by sinking the mass and the ring as close as possible to the bridges in the base plate, the base movement can be made only 2.45 millimeters thick, but this beryllium ring is supported by 4 ruby roller bearings, so as close coupled as it is to the bridges and plates, this assembly cannot collide with them and mar them or damage the watch. So this system is integral to the thinness of the watch. Now it beats away at a rather vintagey 19,800 vibrations per hour, which was considered a high beat rate in the late 60s. This one's been upgraded with a free-sprung Gyromax style balance for precise adjustment in 5 positions, which this watch has, and it beats away at 19,800 while pivoting on 38 joules. Now you can see that the entire movement has been both skeletonized and engraved. They're two separate things. The engraving is the patterns on the metal that's left. The skeletonization is the removal of the metal, including on the ratchet wheel, which is steel and sits atop an open barrel. You can see that all of these surfaces have been beveled both externally and internally, which is why the balance cock itself, I'm trying to show it clearly, but the balance cock itself has 4 sharp interior angles where bevels meet. All screw heads are black polished with chamfered slots in circumference, and the wheels that haven't been skeletonized away feature solarization or satination. You can see that the skeletonized crown wheel actually features both solarization and interior beveling, which is deeply impressive. In its day, it was 20 meters water resistant, but these days don't mess around with water with a watch like this. Treat it as an emerging class of vintage timepiece, and you will never be disappointed. Rare, exotic, and very much unlike what AP is making, mostly with machine assistance in this day and age. A bygone era and a classic one. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Oh, and if I didn't mention it, 40-hour automatic winding power reserve.